Program Manager for the California Opioid Safety Network at the Center for Health Leadership and Practice, a program of the Public Health Institute. You are about to watch a webinar that has been condensed from its original format to provide specific content regarding strategies for engaging law enforcement. During the webinar, we will cover trends, existing strategies, and lessons from the field. The subject matter expert for this webinar is Dr. Matt Willis, our clinical lead for the California Opioid Safety Network. We will also hear from a panel of local law enforcement members. Let's get started.
Thank you. Coalitions are designed to bring together sectors, and law enforcement has really been key to the coalition architecture right off the bat from when these coalitions really first evolved. The role of law enforcement is key, but it's increasingly so based on things we may not have been able to predict as early, as late as 2015, a lot of our efforts were focused on safe prescribing and relationships with healthcare providers, and law enforcement may have been a smaller subset of the stakeholder makeup. With now the emergence, as this slide suggests, of increasing use of other synthetic opioids, that orange line, or increasing use of heroin, the blue line, with an overall increase in all opioid overdose deaths across the nation, we're seeing an ever-increasing contribution of illicit opioids to the burden of the opioid epidemic. So, illegal activity that brings us into relationship with law enforcement is emerging as one of the drivers of the epidemic, and suggests that our partnerships need to be strengthened with our law enforcement agencies. Or these are the sort of what's being described as the three waves or phases of the opioid epidemic. The first from 96 or so to 2012, which was mainly prescription opioids, and we've talked about the role of the pharmaceutical manufacturers in promoting overprescribing. Now we inherit, a cohort of individuals who are addicted. At the same time, there are new users starting in 2012 using increasing contribution of heroin. And then the third wave, more recent, is the rapid rise in fentanyl. This is mortality data from the dashboard that stratifies the cause of death by opioid type by age. And what it really does is add some definition to that observation that we're seeing more illicits, and shows that it's really the younger populations are really disproportionately affected by heroin and fentanyl compared to our older populations. So when we're thinking about how to engage law enforcement, a lot of our strategies that we're currently working on might benefit from optimizing our relationships with law enforcement. So think about any activities in these areas: reducing opioid overprescribing. Even our work with our clinicians can be enhanced by law enforcement in ways we'll talk about. Your friends in law enforcement can help. When we talk about law enforcement, who are we actually referring to? A law enforcement agency is any agency which enforces the law. It could be special, local, or state police or federal agencies. So the strict definition is uniformed officers, detectives, state police, and highway, sheriff, which includes, importantly, the coroner and the jail in most California counties, and then moving up to the federal level, the Department of Justice, the DEA, and other agencies. For our partnerships with jails and the courts and the district attorneys, the courts are considered to be part of the larger umbrella of criminal justice, but certainly should be included in our conversation about law enforcement. So these are some of the specific coalition strategies that are supported by law enforcement in those buckets that we've already described as being the key areas strategically that we're working in, which is preventing new starts, managing chronic pain safely, treating opioid use disorder, and stopping overdose deaths. So in prevent, safe prescribing efforts can be enhanced by communications from the coroner, who can report deaths in a letter back to prescribers saying, just so you know, a patient of yours passed away and your name was found in the cures report as being someone who prescribed to that person. Or district attorneys, similar communication back to providers around arrests. As a form of enhanced education for people who may not otherwise know the way in which their prescribing practices may be contributing to harm. Medication disposal Police stations are good hosts for take-back bins, especially with the DEA regulations around who can host a take-back bin. Community education, so officers are really entrusted, valued members of public safety and public health, and when they speak in public, people listen. And officer outreach in community groups to schools is another important activity that law enforcement members can do. In the realm of treat, law enforcement officers obviously come into contact with people who are struggling with addiction because addiction so often leads to behaviors that run afoul of the law. So making sure that law enforcement has opportunities to not only tie those people into the criminal justice system, but also tie them into treatment is another emerging opportunity for partnership. Drug courts can support addiction treatment over incarceration, and actually treatment as a condition of sentencing is a really promising area where judges can be invited into the fold. And then obviously treatment for opioid use disorder in our jails is a really efficient way for law enforcement to contribute to our work. It's our fourth strategy of stopping deaths. One of the most obvious relationships for coalitions with law enforcement is in naloxone, to make sure those first responders have access to naloxone and can use it to reverse an overdose that they might come across before 911 might arrive, or to make sure that they themselves are protected if they come into contact with a substance that ends up being a high-potency opioid, and furnishing naloxone from jails upon release. So these are our panelists for today. So I'm going to start with Judy. And Judy, I'd like to hear what your role is in Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. How did you get engaged in addressing the opioid epidemic from that role? Any initiative you're most excited about? And what barriers did you experience along the way, and how did you overcome them?
Okay, thank you so much. I am a commander in our Special Operations Division in the Sheriff's Department. We serve a population of about 11 million over about 4,000 square miles, the largest Sheriff's Department in the country. I oversee our SWAT teams and our helicopters and those types of things in Special Operations. However, I became involved in this tragically about 18 months ago. I lost a nephew to an opioid overdose. My brother, who is a doctor in Boston, called me and said, what is LA County doing about the opioid epidemic? And ignorantly at the time I said, I don't know. I don't know that we have an opioid epidemic problem here, and we're really not doing anything to address it. He was relentless in his efforts to get me to acknowledge that there was a problem in this country, and although we hadn't seen it yet in LA, we had an opportunity and really a responsibility to prepare for what was to come. So I went to some representatives from the Board of Supervisors and asked for some help. They were able to steer me to the Department of Public Health that already had a collaborative effort, a coalition that we call SafeMed LA. I have to give credit to Department of Public Health under the direction of Dr. Gary Tsai. We've been working on this initiative for a couple years. So he had action teams in place ready to address this issue. I actually came on about 18 months ago, and I lead the law enforcement action team of that collaborative. We have another collaborative that is paralleling that we call the HEART Collaborative, which is really kind of bridging those gaps of communication within the county system. Medical examiner's office has data, public health has data, correctional health has data, the Sheriff's Department has data, but we needed a process to share all of that and really work together to make those decisions that are most appropriate as we address this epidemic. We've been fortunate in LA County. We really haven't seen an increase like the rest of the country. We hope that's because of the good work that has, the foundation that's previously laid. We want to stay on top of it. When we first started exploring the issue of Narcan and having our officers equipped with Narcan in the field, one of the hurdles that we came across was in order to purchase the Narcan from the vendor, we had to have a standing order from a physician. Believe it or not, that was a tremendous hurdle that delayed us for months because we couldn't find the right person to issue that standing order. And one of the lessons I learned from this, and I'd like to share with everybody on this phone call, is that you don't have to take no for an answer. So we ultimately got our standing order, and then furthermore, I didn't want other law enforcement agencies to have that same battle, so we went to Sacramento and had a bill drafted so that law enforcement agencies won't need a standing order to purchase naloxone. The biggest hurdle, I think, as a law enforcement agency that we faced and continue to face, because I think it's an evolving process, is I'll call it perception and a paradigm shift. I think it's really important that we, as we collaborate with our medical communities and our health communities and our treatment centers and recovery experts, that we recognize and respect that each of us bring a different perspective to this problem. And for law enforcement officers, particularly someone like me that has 38 years with the department, we come with a different perspective when it comes to addiction. We're raised and operate in an environment where we take criminals to jail, and also our focus is enforcement of the law. And we now need to respect and recognize that people who suffer from addiction need a treatment and recovery. They may not be malicious or ill-intended, but just sick. However, that's not to say that law enforcement's role has changed. Believe me when I tell you, law enforcement's efforts are going to be to continue to aggressively pursue those people that manufacture, sell, and distribute illicit narcotics to our communities.
Lieutenant Frost, the same set of questions. So what is your role in Siskiyou County?
I've been involved with the DEA on the National Prescription Drug Take-Back Program, and that basically came about with personal tragedy. More importantly, I was separated back in 1998 from my first wife. Called me one day, and she had overdosed on some prescription meds that she had from a previous surgery from 3 years prior. She overdosed and passed away back in 1998. So when I came into the coalition, then they started talking about Narcan. Through Title 22, we were required to have some training. So we had already been public safety first aid training, which was the minimum standard for California on the field work. So what I did was wrote the program locally, submitted it to EMSA, and they accepted the program. And at that point, I was able to train the Sheriff's Department. But when I got into that program, I found out that not everybody was necessarily on board law enforcement-wise. And so it's just been a slow process over the last year and a half, getting all of the other law enforcement partners on board with that. And then continuing outreach. I do agree with Commander Gearhart on, yes, our main responsibility is to make people accountable. However, with changes in the law and more focus toward possible treatment, then we're not keeping a lot of these folks in jail anymore. We certainly have a lack of facilities and lack of treatment, starting to expand more into the MAT treatment programs and seeing what we can do about helping these folks so that they, number one, don't reoffend, and then number two, that they get the help that they need. We have a running population of about 45,000.
We've got the spectrum represented here. Lieutenant Pollock, welcome.
So glad to be here.
I've got the same questions for you.
Our county is about 65,000 population. Been in law enforcement for 23 years with the Sheriff's Office. My current role is overseeing our investigations units, which includes our narcotics unit, and also I'm the PIO and / deputy coroner. So I kind of see a lot of different areas as far as I see our investigators out conducting their investigations and locating all the narcotics. Plus, I've seen on the coroner side, I see our deaths from overdoses. Like a month ago, I was assigned to go to a Safe RX Coalition meeting. Our department is a little behind most with trying to implement some programs. We're just starting our training for the naloxone. We had some hurdles to get over at first. Our local emergency management group didn't agree with us being able to administer the naloxone. So it took some time to get them to join in and sign off on our training program. That's been done, and we've trained probably half of our deputies now to start carrying the naloxone and administering it. One of the new things we're working on here is a program called Leave It Behind, so that we'll be able to take these kits, and our officers, when they identify some high-risk folks, they can leave the kit behind with naloxone and instructions, so it gets out there to the people that need it the most, which are the people around the opioid users. And that's kind of where we're at currently in our county.
What advice would you have for trying to build similar initiatives to the ones you've successfully or are in the process of building?
From the Lake County side, what I've seen, from the law enforcement side with, county attorneys and trying to get everyone on board with a new program, as much support documentation or policies or other agencies that are already implementing these programs helps speed up the process, because that's somewhat one of the most difficult hurdles is getting the buy-in from all the county side and the county attorneys to sign off and allow a new program to start.
That's something that we've heard over and over again, which is when trying to engage law enforcement, making sure that the documentation and the legalities of it and just the operations are really clean and well vetted and well understood and assembled prior to initial outreach.
I think it's really important that we try to respect each other's positions and understand where we're coming from to ultimately reach that goal. And we all know somebody who suffers from addiction. If we open the channels of communication with one another and really respect each other's positions, raise awareness and education, it will reduce that stigma and it'll really allow us to progress forward.
Commander, I'm struck by, both you and Lieutenant Frost having very close personal experiences with this. Do you think that that's something that, strategically in your if we're trying to build bridges, sharing those stories one with the other, kind of just as a way of building, bonding, the relationship, is that something that you think is valuable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
It was a very conscious, yes, absolutely. It was a very conscious decision for me to come forward with my nephew's story. And I realized that it is all around me. And just because I am in this profession of law enforcement does not make me immune from what's happening in society. And I thought, if I hide behind my badge and I'm afraid to talk about the loss that my family suffered, then shame on me, because I'm only contributing to the stigma. So I made a very conscious decision to come forward and let people know that, it's okay. It's okay to talk about it, and we're all in this together. And we really need to help each other through this.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I use to my advantage is my medical background. It's a little different than just coming at it from the law enforcement. I've been able to bridge that gap between the two. Public health is pushing to have a needle exchange program, and getting that kind of backing from law enforcement has been difficult. So I'm all for that program, and so I'm going to try to bridge that gap between public health and law enforcement on needle exchange programs, because I think that those all play hand in hand and they're all important.
As we build these relationships between public health and law enforcement, is really to think about what's in it for them. So with our collaboration with our Department of Public Health, that's where we got our Narcan. Our first 5,000 doses came from a grant that was given to us through our Department of Public Health, and then we received another 1,000 doses from a treatment center grant. And so that we deployed Narcan that didn't have to come out of the Sheriff's Department's budget. So it's because of that partnership that we were able to do that, and I think it built some trust between those two agencies, between Public Health and Sheriff's Department, to say we really want the same thing out of this.
The approach that I've been able to have the most success with our local law enforcement is to explain to them that incarceration and just putting people in jail for addiction problems is probably not the answer, and that if you look to the future, we have so many people that are not just out committing crimes, but they also have these significant addiction issues, and we really need to and be thinking outside the box when it comes to helping communities and trying to help these folks, get on the right track. I always tell people that when you get right down to it and have a personal conversation, or whether you're having an argument with someone over it, you really have to come down and it's like who in the room wants to pick and choose who survives or who doesn't. Everybody wants to help, and everybody wants to see other people succeed. we have a long ways to go, and I certainly have those conversations, but I don't get anybody that really has pushed back on the fact that we need to try something a little bit different than what we have been doing, because obviously that hasn't always worked. Putting people in jail is probably not the total answer there. My sheriff was an easy sell, so once I came to an understanding with my sheriff, then I knew where my parameters were as far as how far I could push our programs. And so far, we've had some resistance, and of course, we've had some resistance even with our own, members of our department. But I think if you continue with a solid message and you continue to meet with these groups and then invite them to the table, and then just continue with that. I noticed that when we first put out Narcan, they were looking at it and they took the training, and there was a lot of comments about whether or not they were going to make any difference. And it took a little while, but once there was a few doses deployed and then there was a few people that were saved, then that word starts spreading, and then you start getting a little bit more people on your side. I noticed that was the same, too, with Board of Supervisors when it came to a needle exchange program that the health department is trying to promote, and then having somebody from law enforcement to support the program and give some input also help bridge the gap with the Board of Supervisors. So it's just a matter of teamwork and then educating sometimes our elected folks so that they're also on the same page.
So this is Judy. I'll just, budgetary issues are a concern. We do have competing interests, with mental illness and homelessness and all of those other societal issues that we're facing right now. They're all competing for very limited resources. Recognizing that, I think it's worthy for police departments and sheriff's departments, all law enforcement agencies, to really take advantage of the grant opportunities that are out there. In a department our size, needless to say, it's very expensive to equip our officers with Narcan. But we were able to do it through grant funding. The department did do an initial pilot that we paid for out of the Sheriff's Department's budget, but beyond that, now we have grant funding for the next 4 years. We all want to see results, and one of the most positive, promising results that we have seen coming out of LA County within our jail facilities, the Department of Correctional Health works with the Sheriff's Department in our custodial environment to provide treatment programs, job training, rehabilitation, warm handoffs, the whole gamut, and has been doing it now for several years. And although they haven't published their statistics yet, it appears to be very promising that those people that have gone through that program, the recidivism rate for those particular candidates is much less than kind of the general population that's coming out of the jail facility. Again, it's kind of a long-term strategic move that where we are focusing in LA County while somebody is in custody to give them the resources that they need. My goal personally would be to be able to impact people before they touch the criminal justice system so that they never have to go through that process. But I think we're trying to hit it from every angle.
Thank you for watching this video. Please visit our website, CaliforniaOpioidSafetyNetwork.org, to access tools and resources, information on funding opportunities, and more videos in this learning series on opioid safety strategies and coalition development.